Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people that I've connected with in the entertainment world over the years who are all just a little bit more famous than I am. And today, I'm quite pleased to have with us, from the iconic Canadian metal band Anvil, Steve Kudlow. Welcome to the show, Steve.
How's it going, man?
Well, it's going about as good as it can be. Really glad to have you here today. So I want to start back in the early days. I understand that you got your first guitar when you were only 9 years old, and that you had some help from your older brother learning how to play. What can you tell us about the early years, Steve?
Well, the early years I guess my whole experience with guitar was basically in line with the invention of rock and roll, really, in a certain sense. I sort of became aware previous to owning a guitar because I was actually an Elvis fan originally. And, my dad had a tailor shop, and there was a music store 2 doors away, and the guy from the music store had come in to purchase a suit. And my dad got talking to him, and the guy offered him a deal to give him an electric guitar as partial payment for a suit. So my dad did the deal and brought home an electric guitar, and that's when it all began. And interestingly, of course, we didn't have an amplifier or anything, so we had to plug it into our hi-fi system that we had at that particular time, something like a Grundig, and we had to use German plugs and resolder and figure out how to make the guitar come through it. And we're talking about 1965, 66, something like that. So the technology was pretty limited in a certain sense. And it was really the beginnings of stuff like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And that kind of became a learning area for me, in that sense. And my mother had signed me up for guitar lessons, and we bought the Beatles Rubber Soul songbook. And from that, I learned how to play all my chords. And with my older brother's help, and that's how it all began.
Well, it certainly was a golden age of rock and roll, that's for sure. Lots of good influences that we had back in those days. So I understand that you started playing with Rob Reiner way back in 1973. You guys did some different things and eventually founded Anvil in 1978. But wasn't the band originally called Lips?
Yeah, it went through a number of different transitions. At one point, we called the band God, G-A-W-D. You were talking about in the 70s itself, right? Then Gravestone. And then eventually, what happened was in the early 70s, or in the mid-70s, there was a band called Kickback that Rob and I joined for a short period of time. And after that, self-destructed, we had enough, and we'd been working with a guy that was a singer, and that didn't work out very well, having to depend on a guy who didn't play an instrument to sing, and it became a real detriment, actually. And from that, it put me in a position where I have to learn how to sing, or at least not necessarily learn how to sing, start singing, and learn as you go, I guess.
Right, yeah, I can relate to that.
And that's how it ended up. And from that, eventually we came up with the idea, okay, we'll call the band Lips, and all the songs will be suggestive and sexually oriented stuff. And that turned into, we did our first album after a couple of years out on the road as Lips, and we eventually got a record deal. And when we got the record deal, the record company suggested that we changed our name because there was Lips Incorporated and Horse Lips, and they thought they wanted us to come up with something a little bit more in line with what heavy metal what was coming, right? And Rob came up with the idea to call the band Anvil, and that's what we did. And of course, the first album was Lips, Hard and Heavy, and it's interesting that we used the same title, Hard and Heavy, which suited the name Anvil a lot better. And of course, the cover and the hammer and smashing the anvil and all all that, and away we went. And we've been doing those alliteration titles ever since, and it's been kind of the Anvil tradition to do that, and we're still doing it.
Yeah, that's a really appropriate name. There's not much that signifies heavy metal any more than Anvil does, that's for sure.
Well, the thing is, we came at a time when no one else, there was no name. It was a wide open book. Pick a name.
Right. Yeah, and you got off to a pretty good start, I guess, with the, was it Super Rock in Japan that you guys made your first had your first big show?
No, not really. But okay. Japan came later on.
Okay. I just know that was
we didn't go to Japan for the first time until 1983, so I wouldn't say Japan was our first big show. The first big shows were actually well before that, like opening for the Motorhead at the Danforth Music Hall in 1981. We actually did 2 shows there, and then we went across Canada with Girls School. That was in 81, and then 82 we were open for Iron Maiden, and 83 we opened for Dio. So then by 83 we ended up doing an entire Motorhead tour of the UK, and as well as going to Japan for the first time. So yeah, it was, the early 80s. What are you going to say about it?
Right, yeah, it was a pivotal time, that's for sure, and you guys sure made your mark. I remember from watching the documentary, Lars Ulrich said that basically everybody else ripped you guys off and then left you for dead. So I know you influenced a lot of big names like Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax.
Yeah, well, being Canadian, it happened before the Americans saw it. They saw it and they went, "We've got to do this too." And then that ended our career.
That's crazy how it works. I mean, you guys, you put on a hell of a show, and even still today, Rob put me and my wife on the guest list when you guys played here in London, Ontario at Norma Jean's a while ago. And I was really impressed with not only the show, but how you guys interact with the crowd. And I remember at the end of it, I had bought some merch and I had the DVD that I wanted to get signed, and I made my way to the green room, and the owner at the time was kind of giving me some grief, and then you came out and said, "Yeah, come on back." And I had never met you before. It just goes to show that you guys are really appreciative of your audience.
Always have been. And believe me, the movie would not have happened if that attitude hadn't been there from the get-go, because the guy who actually ended up doing the movie was one of those people that came knocking at the dressing room door to let him in, and we made friends with him. And then, like 30 years later, he became a screenwriter and made the Anvil movie. So you never know who you're being nice to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess if you just be nice to people.
There's a bit, but she can be really nice too.
That's right. Yeah. But I guess the old saying, you get back what you reap. So if you're good to people, then it comes around. Absolutely. I know you were never really interested in writing hit songs, but one thing that I've observed with your music that kind of distinguishes you guys from other metal bands is that you write really good songs. I mean, there are a lot of really talented players out there that play metal, shredders, whatever, but the songs are just not that great. And that really, I think, distinguishes you guys. You write really good songs.
I agree. Not everybody does. It is an art in itself that goes far beyond necessarily what talent is about. Having an imagination and coming up with interesting ideas is much, much more important than I'm the fastest lead guitar player that ever existed. Because you know what? The faster and more intricate and the more shit that you know, the harder it is to actually come up with something original. Because you're so overemphasized on your abilities, you want to put everything in the kitchen sink into every song. And what does that do? It makes it cloudy, hard to get to the point, hard for people to comprehend because you put too much into it, far beyond a comprehension level of what it takes to make a good song. A good song is not necessarily all about what it takes to play it as far as the integrity. It has to do with memorability, groove, the feeling, the subject matter of the lyrics, the melody, all those things. Those are the things that are actually most important about writing a song, and understanding what arrangement is and how arrangements work and why a bad arrangement can wreck a great song. So you have to learn all that stuff. And it's a lot of time and effort and experience that makes you a good songwriter. It's not something that you can go learn. You can't go take lessons for songwriting. It's either you have a good imagination or you don't.
Right. And I think Frank Zappa put it best, the more complicated the music gets, the more it sounds like honking geese. And you guys, you get that. So I'm sure that's why you've had such a long-standing following. Your fans are die-hard and have been with you for a long, long time. I remember at the show in London, you had guys there from Toronto and etc. And not very many bands can say that.
Well, we have an extremely large age group. The age group is massive. Anything from teenagers to old men, which is actually really interesting because it's really, really very difficult to stay relevant in any genre of music because every styles come and go. But the thing about Anvil music is that it's really timeless in the sense that it's anything from hard rock to extremely fast speed metal. So it can be a lot of different things. And when you can be a lot of different things, you tend to be more accessible in the whole broader sense of it and able to be appreciated by different age groups. Certainly people from the older generation can relate to some of our material in the sense because it's still very much attached to 60s and 70s rock music. And then on the other hand, it can be very, very modern in the sense that we also have done very, very speedy, high-intensity speed metal, which is much more in the line with modern day kids. So we have a huge demographic as far as age group is concerned, and different genres of metal that it fragmented into after the 80s. So it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's not just, your music isn't just being handed down from grandpa to dad to junior. You're actually gaining new people as you go.
That's right, because we never stopped putting out records. It's not a band that we existed in the 70s or the 80s and put the band back together 30 years later and we got an audience. It's not like that. It's a band that's been putting out records for 40 years,
Well, you have 18
studio albums.
18 studio albums to date, and aren't you guys working on new material right now?
Yeah, pretty much done another album a year ahead of the curve. So unfortunately, with the COVID thing, it cut our touring schedule this year for the last album right off. So we are not going to get to tour for the latest album, Legal at Last. We're going to end up recording again in a year from now. And then after that recording, we're going to go out and we're going to hopefully be able to tour the 2 albums worth of material.
Right.
So that's what's going to end up happening. So, we used our downtime with this COVID thing to go back into rehearsal and write another album, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I don't know what people that don't have the music do in times like this, because more than once, music has saved my life, and I think that guys like you and me are really fortunate to have this release in such a stressful time in today's world. What would we do without the music?
Oh, I don't know. It gives me something. It's what my life is revolved around. I wouldn't know what it would be like without it. Furthermore, I would never want to know.
Absolutely. I get you, man. And, you're one of the few long-standing metal guys out there, or musicians out there, who's been doing this for as long as you have, but you also had a day job. And I understand that gives you some balance, and it lets you have an actual family life. And I think that's what goes wrong with a lot of artists, is that they don't have that time, they don't have the normalcy that you had because you made that sacrifice in that you had a day job.
I think that it's actually Well, only like 1% of the people